Nestled in the heart of a dense, foreboding forest stood an old cabin, its wooden facade weathered by time and the elements. It was here that Michael, a young man in his late 20s, sought refuge following a traumatic event that had left his life in shambles. He needed solitude, away from the prying eyes and whispers of the city. The cabin, with its promise of isolation, seemed like the perfect escape. The journey to the cabin was a trek through winding, overgrown paths that seemed untouched by human presence for years. As he approached, the forest grew denser, the canopy above blotting out the sun, casting long, haunting shadows that danced in the wind. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, a natural balm for his troubled mind. The cabin itself was rustic and unassuming, a 2-story structure with a stone chimney and a creaky porch. It was surrounded by an expanse of wilderness, the nearest neighbor miles away. For Michael, it was a sanctuary, a place to heal and to forget. As he settled in, Michael felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in months. The quiet was a stark contrast to the constant noise of the city. He spent the days exploring the woods, the nights reading by the fireplace. The simple routine was therapeutic, a way to mend his frayed nerves. But as the days passed, Michael began to notice something unsettling. Each night, as the darkness enveloped the cabin and the forest, faint whispers seemed to drift on the wind. At first, he dismissed them as the rustling of leaves or the creaking of the old cabin settling. But the whispers persisted, growing clearer, more articulate. They were voices, disembodied and eerie, speaking in hushed tones. Michael couldn't make out the words at first, but their presence sent a chill down his spine. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming by day, turned sinister in the cloak of night. Curiosity and unease gripped him. He would stay awake, listening intently, trying to discern the source of the whispers. They seemed to come from the forest itself, as if the trees were speaking to him. The voices were numerous, some male, some female, all speaking at once, yet not to each other. It was as if each voice was recounting a different tale. One night, as the whispers grew louder, Michael managed to catch fragments of what they were saying. Words like lost, never returned, and beware sent shivers down his spine. The voices spoke of past horrors, of people who had ventured into these woods and never emerged, their fates forever unknown. Michael's initial peace turned to unease. He tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination, the product of his solitary confinement and the eerie ambience of the forest. But the voices grew more insistent, more ominous. Then, one night, amidst the cacophony of whispers, a single voice rose above the rest. It was clear, almost melodic, but with a chilling edge. "You are not alone," it whispered, sending a wave of dread through Michael. "They watch. They wait." That night, Michael barely slept. The sense of being watched, of unseen eyes upon him, was overwhelming. The cabin, his sanctuary, had become a prison, and the forest outside, a watchful, malevolent entity. As dawn broke, Michael was left with a haunting question. What were these voices? And what did they want from him? The morning after the voice singled him out, Michael awoke to a world cloaked in an uneasy silence. The sun's rays struggled to pierce the dense canopy, casting weak, diffused light that barely touched the forest floor. The cabin, once a haven, now felt like a cage. Determined to understand the source of the whispers, Michael decided to explore deeper into the forest. He packed a small bag with essentials and set out, the forest floor crunching beneath his boots. As he ventured further, the trees grew closer together, their gnarled branches intertwining like skeletal hands. The deeper Michael went, the more he felt the oppressive weight of the forest. It was as if the very air was thick with unspoken warnings. Birds that had cheerfully chirped now fell silent, and the whispers seemed to follow him, a constant, unintelligible murmur just out of clear understanding. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to warp and twist around him, disorienting him. The whispers grew louder, more fervent. They spoke of pain, of suffering, of dark rituals performed in the heart of the woods. Michael's heart raced as he realized he was not merely an observer. He was part of a story that had begun long before he set foot in the cabin. As the day waned, Michael stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, its surface worn and covered in moss. Around it, the ground was barren, the trees forming a natural barrier. The air here was colder, the whispers louder. Michael approached the altar, drawn by a morbid curiosity. Carvings adorned its sides, depicting scenes of sacrifice and otherworldly entities. The voices crescendoed, a chorus of anguish and warning, speaking of a malevolent presence that dwelled within the forest. He felt eyes upon him, watching from the shadows. Panic set in, and Michael turned to leave, but the forest had changed. The path he had followed was gone, replaced by an impenetrable wall of trees and underbrush. Nightfall approached, and with it, a deepening sense of dread. Michael was lost, the whispers his only company. They spoke now in urgent, hushed tones, telling him he was being hunted, that the forest was alive with a hunger for the souls of the lost. In the darkness, shapes moved, quick and ethereal, just beyond the corner of his eye. Michael felt a primal fear take hold, the fear of being prey. The cabin, with all its eerie occurrences, seemed like a sanctuary compared to the malevolent wilderness that now encircled him. As he wandered aimlessly, the temperature dropped, a cold that seeped into his bones. Frost began to form on the ground, an unnatural occurrence for the season. The voices became a cacophony, screaming, crying, pleading. Then, in a moment of chilling clarity, the voices united into one, a deep, resonant voice that spoke directly into Michael's soul. "You cannot leave. You are part of the forest now." Michael ran, the branches clawing at his clothes, the ground seeming to shift beneath him. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached. But no matter how far he went, the altar was always in sight, the center of this twisted living forest. Exhausted, frightened, and lost, Michael collapsed at the base of a tree, the whispers enveloping him like a shroud. The forest closed in, the darkness absolute. Michael awoke to a world devoid of light. The forest had engulfed him, its towering trees blocking out the sky. He tried to rise, but his body was heavy, drained of energy. The whispers had ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that weighed down on him like a physical force. As he lay there, trying to gather his strength, Michael realized the forest had changed around him. The trees seemed to pulse with a dark energy, their bark gnarled and twisted, faces contorted in silent screams etched into the wood. The ground was covered in a thick layer of fog that slithered around him like living tendrils. He stumbled to his feet, a sense of urgency propelling him forward. The realization dawned on him that the forest was not just a setting for the horrors he had heard whispered. It was a sentient being, and he was trapped within its grasp. Michael wandered through the fog, each step an effort against the mire that seemed to grasp at his feet. The air was thick, suffocating. He could feel the presence of the forest around him, watching, waiting. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time had lost its meaning in this place. Hunger and thirst began to set in, gnawing at him, but fear was a more immediate concern. The sensation of being hunted, pursued by something unseen, was ever present. Then, the whispers returned, more intense than before. They spoke of a ritual, a sacrifice needed to appease the ancient spirits of the forest. Michael's heart sank as he understood the implications. He was not merely lost, he was chosen, a pawn in a game that stretched back centuries. The fog cleared suddenly, revealing a small, decrepit cabin, its appearance eerily similar to his own, yet older, abandoned to time. The whispers urged him towards it, their tone insistent. With trepidation, Michael approached the cabin. The door hung ajar, its wood rotten. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of decay. The cabin was a mirror of his own, yet twisted, corrupted. The furniture was covered in dust, the walls adorned with archaic symbols that seemed to writhe under his gaze. In the center of the room lay a book, its cover leather-bound and worn. As he picked it up, the whispers grew louder, chanting in a language he did not understand. The book was filled with ancient rites, tales of sacrifices made to appease the dark deities of the forest. A sense of despair overcame Michael. He realized that his arrival at the cabin was not by chance. He had been drawn here, summoned by forces beyond his comprehension. The whispers became commands, urging him to complete the ritual. Michael resisted, but the compulsion was overpowering. The cabin seemed to close in on him, the walls pulsing with a malevolent life force. Outside, the forest stirred. Shadows moved between the trees, forms that were both human and not. They were the lost souls, bound to the forest, their whispers a chorus of eternal suffering. Michael understood then that escape was impossible. The forest would never release its grip on him. His fate was sealed, a mere continuation of the cycle that had claimed so many before him. As night fell, the forest grew restless, the air charged with anticipation. The ritual would be completed, one way or another. As night descended upon the accursed forest, Michael felt the pull of the dark forces that bound him to this place. The whispers grew into a deafening roar, echoing the tormented cries of the lost souls that the forest had claimed. The cabin itself seemed to pulsate with a sinister life force, its very structure contorting in impossible ways. Michael, caught in the grip of an unseen power, found himself enacting the ritual described in the ancient tome. His actions were not his own, as if he were a marionette controlled by the malevolent will of the forest. Around him, the cabin transformed into a grotesque altar, the walls adorned with symbols that glowed with an eerie, unearthly light. Outside, the shadowy figures converged towards the cabin, their forms barely human, twisted by the forest's corruption. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light, reflecting their eternal torment. They encircled the cabin, a congregation for the unholy ritual that was about to unfold. In the center of the cabin, a spectral figure materialized, its form shifting and twisting in the dim light. It was the embodiment of the forest's dark deity, a being of pure malevolence that had presided over the land for centuries. Its presence filled the cabin with a suffocating dread, the air heavy with the stench of decay. Michael, compelled by forces beyond his control, began to chant in an ancient tongue, his voice joining the cacophony of whispers. The spectral figure loomed closer, its form becoming clearer, a twisted, horned entity, its eyes burning with a hunger for suffering. The shadows around the cabin stirred, the lost souls beginning their own macabre dance, a ritualistic procession that was both mesmerizing and horrifying. They moved in a twisted parody of life, their voices a chorus of agony. Michael, trapped in the nightmare he had unwittingly become a part of, felt his sanity slipping. The forest, the cabin, and the spectral entity had merged into a singular presence of evil, a force that sought to consume his very soul. As the ritual reached its climax, the spectral figure extended its shadowy hands towards Michael, its touch cold as death. In that moment, Michael felt a searing pain, as if his essence was being torn from his body. The walls of the cabin closed in, the symbols glowing brighter, a vortex of dark energy enveloping him. The forest outside echoed with the screams of the damned, a symphony of despair that resonated with the ritual's culmination. The boundary between the living and the dead blurred, the cabin becoming a portal to a realm of endless suffering. In his final moments of consciousness, Michael understood the true horror of his fate. He was to become one with the forest, another lost soul bound to its malevolent will, forever a part of its dark legacy. As the darkness consumed him, Michael's last sight was the spectral entity's triumphant gaze, a vision of eternal torment that would haunt the forest for generations to come. In the aftermath of the ritual, the forest lay in a sinister silence. The cabin, now a monument to the unspeakable horror that had transpired within its walls, stood as a twisted beacon in the heart of the woods. The air was thick with the remnants of dark energy, a miasma of despair that blanketed the area. Michael, now a mere shadow of his former self, found himself trapped in a limbo between life and death. His physical form was gone, absorbed by the forest, but his consciousness lingered, ensnared by the dark deity's malevolent grasp. He became a spectator to the horrors of the forest, forced to witness the endless suffering of the lost souls. The tormented whispers became his constant companions, recounting tales of sorrow and despair. The forest was alive with their pain, a living entity fueled by the agony of its prisoners. Night after night, the shadowy figures would gather around the cabin, reenacting the ritual, a never-ending cycle of torment. The spectral deity presided over these gatherings, its form more terrifying with each appearance, a god of despair feeding on the suffering it wrought. Michael's existence became one of endless horror. He was bound to the forest, unable to escape, forced to relive the ritual that had claimed his soul. The distinction between his identity and the chorus of whispers blurred. He was becoming a part of the forest, another voice in the symphony of anguish. In this twisted realm, time lost its meaning. The forest was timeless, a pocket of reality governed by the rules of the spectral deity. The cabin stood as the epicenter of this dark world, its presence a constant reminder of the horror that had unfolded within its walls. The forest began to change, its corruption spreading beyond its boundaries. Travelers who wandered too close would disappear, their screams adding to the cacophony of voices. The forest's hunger was insatiable, its desire for souls unquenchable. As Michael drifted in his spectral form, he encountered the remnants of those who had fallen prey to the forest. Their spirits were broken, their essence merged with the woods. They were part of the entity now, lost in an eternal loop of despair and madness. The spectral deity, its power growing with each soul it claimed, began to reach beyond the forest, its influence seeping into the surrounding lands. The area became shrouded in legends and tales of horror, a place feared and shunned by the locals. Michael, in his spectral state, felt a deep sorrow for the lives lost, for the souls ensnared by the forest's curse. He was powerless to stop the cycle, a mere observer in a world ruled by darkness. As the forest grew darker, so too did the world around it. The cabin, once a refuge, was now a gateway to hell, a place where the boundary between life and death was forever shattered. In this realm of eternal night, Michael awaited his fate, a fate shared by all who had been claimed by the forest. The whispers continued, a never-ending lament for the lost and the damned. In the heart of the cursed forest, where darkness reigned eternal, the cabin stood as a grotesque monument to the unyielding horror that had consumed it. The spectral deity, now a towering figure of terror, ruled over its domain with a malevolent glee, its presence a blight upon the very essence of the woods. Michael, lost in the depths of despair, had become one with the forest. His consciousness, fragmented and tormented, floated through the darkened woods, witnessing the relentless horror that the spectral deity inflicted upon the lost souls. The whispers of the damned echoed through the trees, a constant reminder of the forest's insatiable hunger for suffering. The shadowy figures, once human, now twisted echoes of their former selves, roamed the forest, their anguished cries a testament to their eternal torment. As the spectral deity's power grew, so did its ambition. It sought to extend its dominion, to spread its darkness beyond the confines of the forest. The land around the forest withered, the sky above perpetually shrouded in storm clouds, as if nature itself recoiled from the evil that dwelled within. The cabin, a nexus of dark energy, pulsed with a sinister light, its windows portals to a realm of nightmares. It lured the unwary, those drawn by curiosity or fate, into its depths, where they were consumed by the ritual, their souls added to the chorus of the forest. Michael, witnessing this endless cycle of horror, felt an indescribable sorrow. He was powerless to stop the atrocities, his existence a perpetual reminder of his own tragic fate. The forest was a prison, a realm of darkness from which there was no escape. The spectral deity, reveling in its supremacy, cast its gaze upon the world beyond the forest. It whispered promises of power and dominion to those who would listen, its voice a siren call to the dark-hearted. And there were always those who would heed its call, drawn to the cabin, enticed by the lure of forbidden knowledge and power. The forest became a legend, a place of unspeakable horror, whispered about in hushed tones. Tales of the haunted cabin in the woods spread far and wide, a warning to those who would dare to uncover its secrets. But the spectral deity's greed knew no bounds. It yearned for more than the souls of the lost. It desired to engulf the world in its darkness, to spread its reign of terror beyond the forest's borders. In this world of unending night, Michael and the other lost souls drifted, their existence a testament to the cruelty of the spectral deity. They were bound to the forest, their whispers a mournful dirge that resonated through the gnarled trees. And so, the forest remained, a realm of darkness and despair, a place where fear and sorrow reigned supreme. The cabin, with its silent screams, stood as a dark beacon, calling to those who would join the legion of the lost. In the heart of the forest, the spectral deity waited, its hunger never satiated, its thirst for souls unquenchable. It was a darkness that would endure, a blight upon the land, a silent scream echoing through the ages.